Tonight we're going to be learning about McCollum orchards here in Lockport, and Rich and Bree Woodbridge are going to be our speakers. Rich is their third great grandfather.
Third grade.
Was Hiram McCollum, and he's the one that started the farm. And so with that, we'll just turn it over to Rich and Bree. Thank you.
Sorry.
Hello.
We're going to be alternated.
Yeah, we're going to pass off. We were lucky enough to have my mom babysit 7th generation tonight, so we can both be here. She's 14 months, so she would quickly steal the show if she were here with us. So first, I just want to thank you very much for inviting us to come and speak to the Genealogical Society tonight. It's an honor for us. We really appreciate it. And quick introductions. I'm Bree. This is Rich Woodbridge, and we are the owners of McCollum Orchards LLC. This is the house. And how many people are familiar with McCollum Orchards down in Lower Town? So great, good, okay. Yeah. So if you're not familiar, it is a farm in the city of Lockport. It's a 100-acre property, and if you know the kind of overgrown area behind Reed's, that's the back of our property. And then it goes along Old Niagara Road, and the main house and outbuildings are on the corner of North Adam and Vine Street. So, yeah, that's pretty much the property. And it's been in Rich's family since 1827. So it's been in Rich's family for 180 years, which I'm from Arizona. Our state is not, it's just 100 years old, so to me that's pretty incredible. I'm still not over it. And it just is an example of just the rich heritage that exists here in Niagara County, which is pretty incredible and also pretty rare for our country, so it's very special. And with that, we actually are trying to preserve what we're trying to do. Why we returned to, well, actually we're not from Lockport, but why we came here is we're trying to preserve the family farmland and restore it. It's always been a working farm and had a pretty interesting past. The more that we learn about it, the more we think it's pretty neat, actually. And it's a pretty small, it's no small miracle that it still exists today, a 100-acre farm in a city property. So that's our aim, is to get it back to be a working farm. The history of the farm really traces the history of Lockport itself, because it was here right at the beginning, which is fascinating, and Rich will fill you in on some of the family history. And then we'll share just a few of the transformations that we've tried to bring about on the farm since we've been there. We moved here in March of 2011, so 4 years ago. And it was a freezing cold day, so just a regular March here. And yeah, then we'll wrap up with just sharing with you our hopes for the future of the farm, which is we've started a community-supported agriculture farm share program with organic vegetables on the farm. So that's growing quickly, so we'll just share a little bit of that for you, and it's a great way to come and experience the historic farm for yourself. It really is a hidden gem in the city of Lockport. So with that, I will pass it over to Rich now, and he's just going to share a little bit about his family history, which is kind of fun. We get to delve into that here a little bit more than other places, because it's a neat genealogy.
Yeah.
So,
thanks, Bree.
yeah. You want me to?
Sure. We'll keep on this slide for a second.
Yeah, I will.
As you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, it's the Erie Canal. And this close proximity of the farm to the Erie Canal is really why the farm parcel was purchased in the first place.
Oh, okay.
Or I'll do a key.
Okay, yeah.
So the farm has been in my family for over 180 years, and it was founded by Joel McCollum, or purchased by Joel McCollum in 1827 from the Helen Land Company. And actually, I'm going to just dive into some of the family history, and then we'll go into the farm history. And luckily, the family saved a bunch of family documents, and so this is an original, this is a copy of Joel McCollum's handwritten family history from way back in the day. This was written around 1850, and so he was tracing his family back to Scotland. And this is actually, he lists himself and Hiram here, who's my great-great-great-grandfather. And so the McCollums, they came from Scotland, at least his group did. He thinks in Scotland, their name was actually Malcolm, and it was changed to McCollum, and when they moved to New Jersey around the 1750s. His grandfather was born in New Jersey, and then his father was born in New Jersey, then moved to outside of Rochester, New York. And let's see, what else? And so Joel McCollum is my great-great-great-uncle. He was a land developer and a businessman, and when the Erie Canal was being built, he moved over to Lockport and was kind of doing land speculation out there. And he ended up in 1827, along with some other people, the Scovilles and Washington Hunt, who was later governor of New York, bought up large tracts of land in the northeast section of Lockport. Joel McCollum, he set up several businesses, mostly in the Market and Exchange Street part of Lockport. So he owned a mill, he owned a store, he also he managed a bank down there. And then in 1832, he built the farmhouse.
I'll go back.
Yeah, he built this farmhouse. It's a canal stone farmhouse, and it's where we live right now, and it's been in our family since then, which is pretty amazing. And so Joel McCollum, or the Honorable Joel McCollum, he was one of the first judges of Niagara County. He's also, there's a street in Lockport named after him. There's McCollum Street, and it intersects with Ann Street. Ann McCollum was his adopted daughter who died when she was a teenager. And so you got Joel and Ann McCollum Streets right there. And they're actually both buried in Cold Spring Cemetery. So Joel, being a businessman and entrepreneur, when the railroad started pushing west, he followed the railroads and actually founded a few towns in Michigan. And while he knew he was going to move out west, he called upon his youngest brother, Hiram McCollum, who's my great-great-great-grandfather, to come in and take over the farm property. And so Hiram came into the picture around 1842. He was working in New York City at the time. He was selling insurance to packet lines that were shipping goods along the Erie Canal. And so he came up to the farm, and he's the one that really turned this farmland into an active farm. So the first thing he did was put in a huge series of drainage ditches, which we by mistake found last year and flooded our field. Because back in the day it was mostly swampland back there, and so he did this massive drainage system underground that drained pretty much the entire property. He started a very successful fruit, vegetable, and ice business on the farm. And we actually have the ice pond still on the property, and every fall it still fills up with water, which is pretty neat. And back in the 1850s, Hiram was able to turn the property into the largest strawberry farm in New York State, which is also pretty amazing. So, and it's been producing quality fruits and vegetables ever since. And here's a map of 1875. This is where it's McCollum and Son vegetable gardens. And that son is Silas Wright McCollum, one of his youngest sons. Hiram had married 3 times and had 5 children. Silas was one of his oldest boys. And Silas worked with his father on the farm and eventually took over the business around 1878 or 1879. Change the.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So that's Silas McCollum. That's my great-great-grandfather, and I feel like I should have grown a mustache for this presentation. And so he was pretty amazing in terms of what he did with the farm. As I mentioned, he grew it 100-fold. There's reports from the New York State Agricultural Commissioners saying that the pear orchards that Silas set up on the property are the finest that he has ever seen in the state. And in its heyday, he put, there's 10,000 fruit trees growing on the property. It was a pretty impressive business model. Let's see. Oh yeah, and so something, kind of a blessing and a curse of being in a house that old with family members that didn't throw anything out is that you find a lot of neat stuff, but it also takes a long time to sort through that. And so I'm going to show some of the neat things we found, mostly around Silas's generation and Silas's time on the farm. For example, these are seed orders and grain orders from 1883 and 1884 for the farm property. And so, especially the seed order is interesting. You can see it as wax beans, Egyptian beets, cabbages, and all that. And this is what the farm grew and sold to the people of Lockport back in the day. So anyone here that's from Lockport or had family in Lockport, they probably ate some of these vegetables. What's really neat is we were able to track down some of these varieties, these heirloom varieties, and plant them again on the property. And they actually grow pretty well. Random things like salsify and Egyptian beets. And actually, Bree's going to talk a little bit more about that later. But it's just neat having that bit of history, knowing what was grown on the farm almost 180 or 130 years ago. It's pretty impressive. The next one. So Silas was also very politically involved. He was appointed Postmaster General of Lockport in 1877 by Grover Cleveland, and he kept in communications with Grover Cleveland as Cleveland became president. So here's a letter from the executive mansion, which is called the White House now, to Silas, thanking Silas for apples and pears sent from the farm to the White House, which is pretty amazing we have these. And we actually have a few letters from Cleveland, some from Franklin Roosevelt that are actually going to be in the next, the Western New York Pride magazine.
Yeah.
So they're going to be featured in an article in that. So if you're going to change it. Yeah. So here's one from Franklin Roosevelt when he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy in 1914. So this is just the buildup of World War I. Thanking, again, Silas for apples sent from the farm. And also, in the bottom paragraph, it says, I'm so glad to get even a glimpse of you this autumn, which gives me the impression that they knew each other pretty well if they could at least recognize each other. We did find some letters the following year where one of Silas's youngest daughters was stuck in Austria during the war, and Roosevelt was working to try to get her out, and eventually they got her out through Genoa. Roosevelt was able to schedule a steamship to pick her up in Genoa and take her back to the U.S. So it's pretty amazing history, and I'm just happy that the family was able to hold on to those letters after all these years. Change it. So Silas, he married Ella Kate Allen, and they had 9 children. If you go in the Lockport phone book, there are 24 McCollums in the phone book, so each generation had a bunch of kids, and so there are quite a few McCollums around. But this picture is of my great-grandmother, Josephine McCollum Carveth. She lost my place for a second. So it's actually kind of interesting because after Silas passed away, the farm was passed down to 2 generations of women in the family, which was extremely rare at the time. And so it was, when he passed away, it went to Josephine McCollum Carveth. And she was married to Hector Russell Carveth. He was, change it. He was a noted chemist in Niagara Falls. He ran his own company for a while, a chemical company, and then he was the president of DuPont out here in Niagara Falls. And then he retired early and started the Chateau Gay winery in Lewiston, which was the largest winery in the area. And he actually passed away when he was killed when he was pressure testing one of the tanks, and it exploded and knocked him off a ladder. And so after that, my great-grandmother and her sister, they moved back to Lockport area. Because my great-grandmother was living in Niagara Falls at the time. And so they moved back to the Lockport area, and they really invested in the property. They turned it from an old federal-style looking farmhouse to this beautiful Victorian-style farm, or it doesn't even look like a farmhouse anymore. It's like I mean, it has European friezes on it. It's pretty amazing if you haven't seen it before. But they invested a lot of effort into it and put in these decorative friezes. They put in a stone porch and an all-stone sunroom and things like that. And I've met quite a few people that knew my great-grandmother, and she's a noted philanthropist in the area. She donated a lot of money to a lot of charities. She owned and lived in the Sinclair Manor for several years. That's on Locust Street. And there's a Packet Park on Market and Exchange Street. There's a park dedicated to her, and there in was it Upson Park? Upson Park, there is a violet patch dedicated to her. So she was a pretty well-known lady back in the day. And she was also kind of the queen of upcycling and recycling. And so on the side of our property, there's a decorative archway, and that was reclaimed from the old Lockport Union School that was torn down in the 1950s. And then also, as you enter the property, this is before we cleared some of the trees, the gates are actually made out of old school desks from back in the day, so they're all welded together. So there are just little details like that all around the property that was all because of my great-great-grandmother. And then, yeah, in 1958, my great-grandmother died in 1962 or 64. So in 1958, she was still managing the farm, and it was very much, as you can see by this photo, an active farm. And there's still quite a few people around that remember working for her on the farm. After she passed away, it went to, you can change it. It was left to her daughters, and so eventually in the late 1970s, my grandmother, Josie Carveth Woodbridge, moved to Lockport and took over management of the farm. And she always maintained the apple and pear orchards that we had there. Most of the rest of the farm had overgrown, but she always maintained the heirloom apple and pear orchards. She was very involved in local tourism efforts, and she just loved the family history. As many
What
people
year
know.
did she move here?
She moved here 1976, I believe.
76.
Yeah, because she was here for the blizzard of '77. I remember that. I remember her telling me about that. Anyway, I spent my summers on the farm, so I remember the farm. In the '80s, it was still pretty pristine, and it was a great place to grow up as a kid and run around. But as her health declined, so did the health of the farm. And by the time she passed away in 2009, it was severely overgrown. I mean, you really couldn't see it from the road. The apple and pear orchards were still maintained, but everything else had gone, it was probably 20 years of neglect or so. So Bree's actually going to talk a little bit about the transformation and what made us decide to come to the property and do what we've been doing.
Thanks. Yeah, so, yeah, we didn't grow up, we're not farmers, and we had previous careers to this. We weren't ever planning to totally change our lives and start a farm, but it all seemed to fall into place, actually. And it's funny how life works like that a little bit. Yeah, so we actually have backgrounds, Rich in corporate market research, and my background is in international relations. And so Rich's grandmother, he was very close with his grandmother, Josie, and she passed away in 2009. At the time, we were actually living in India and working in India for an economic research think tank. So that's what we were doing. And so when we returned to the United States in 2010, one of our first priorities was to come and pay our respects to Grandma Josie, because we were living in India, so we weren't able to make it to the burial. So we came up to Lockport, and Rich is he's kind of an understated guy, and so he mentioned the farm, you know, while we were together, and I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a citrus farm in Arizona. My father was a citrus farmer, And so, you know, I have my mental picture of my farm, basically. And so when we came in 2010 and we drove up, I saw that, and I thought, oh, that's not a farm. that's something entirely different. And so when we get asked, what made you change your lives and come here? My short answer is this place. There's something really special about it. And when we came and paid our respects and started walking around, it was overgrown for sure, but there was something really special about it. It felt like stepping back in time. It really did. And you could tell underneath all the brush and everything was actually quite a stately place that had once been loved and cared for and lived in and everything. So on our drive home, we got to talking, and I said, what is your family going to do with this? Because most of the family had moved out of the area. His second cousins were living in the house, and they were maintaining it, but you know, it's a full-time job, and they weren't able to do that. So, you know, we got to talking, and what ifs started coming, and that eventually became a really serious conversation between the two of us of what's your family going to do? It's been in the family for 180 years. It would be a real shame to have it go. And the farm I grew up on is currently an outlet shopping mall. So I know the pressures of development on farmland in the United States, and I thought, gosh, that would be a shame because this place is pretty neat. And so we started talking, and we thought, well, what if we moved there? What if we, you know, tried to bring it back as a working farm? What if we were able to do this? And it started kind of falling into place. We could start our own business, which is something we wanted to do. We worked together really well. And we could find a place to settle down, start a family. Both of our jobs had us traveling a lot. So we thought, oh, maybe we don't have to travel as much. And so it started to fall. It took about 6 months of talking, and our parents thought we were totally crazy, which, yeah, probably. But we decided to do it. And so we moved here in March of 2011, and it was a freezing cold day in March, and the very next day we started cleaning out the barn. And we're still cleaning out the barn, actually. So, yeah. And for that first over a year, we actually were able to keep our jobs and work remotely, and then also fix up the farm full-time. So at night, basically, we would have all our conference calls and work on the computer, and then during the day, we would be trying to fix up the farm. So after a year or so, we were totally and utterly exhausted, and we realized that we had not made as much progress on getting the farm up to a farmable state as we hoped. So we pretty much took a big risk, and we left our jobs, and because we decided if we're going to do this, we got to commit to doing this. And so we did, and we left our jobs, and we started farming full-time, or fixing up the farm full-time. We started with a little market garden and a farm stand, and we've grown progressively since then. And turns out that we're not alone in that venture. According to the USDA, it's a small group, but there is a growing group of younger generation who are leaving their jobs in the cities to farm. And so for us, luckily, there were a lot of resources available for beginning farmers. So we took a lot of courses through Cornell. I mean, we're both kind of researchers by background, so we took a lot of courses, we took a lot of classes, and we were able to get into a program through the Organic Farming Association. So we had farm mentors, we visited a lot of farms. We had the benefit of my father coming up and being able to sit on a chair and point at things and show Rich how to do things on the farm, so he was helpful in that regard. And we had the neighbors, we had a lot of memory right in our neighborhood, because most everybody had done something on the farm, worked somehow on the farm. So we had a lot of that. Actually, one of our next door neighbors remembers his grandfather sitting on the porch smoking a pipe with Rich's great great-grandfather, Silas Wright McCollum. So it's pretty amazing to me to have that sort of memory right there. Yeah, so that's pretty much how we decided to come and be here. And Rich will actually, we've had a few successes over the last 4 years, and Rich is actually, he'll fill you in on some of the transformations that we've been able to do in the last 4 years.
Right. So as you can see in the top photo, it's definitely not a turnkey farm. We couldn't just go in and plant seeds and, hey, we're farmers. And so first thing we had to do was clear land. And just clearing land, you can't just go and clear. You have to figure out what the best land is to clear. And luckily, as Bree mentioned, we had neighbors that had worked for my great-grandmother as kids, and they remember all the land. And so they actually came on to the property and pointed out the best areas to clear, where the best soils are, and what areas to avoid, like the large sinkhole that we have. Which, if I didn't know about that, that could have been big trouble. So we actually went through, as the first year, or actually second year, we went through and cleared 50 acres of land of the prime farmland. Also, a lot of the buildings were in severe disrepair, just because of water and time. A lot of the mortar started rotting away on some of the buildings and the infrastructure. And so next stop was shoring up the buildings. And so I was really going through remortaring, doing a whole bunch of masonry work all over the place. Also the basement, they used to have a cistern, and all the gutters went down to the basement to fill the cistern. And they got rid of the cistern, but didn't redirect the gutters. And so for years, the basement flooded. And no one could figure out why it flooded. And finally did some research, and it's because everything from the roof goes into the basement. So we ripped all that out, and so now it drains, and the basement doesn't flood every time it rains. So just things like that. The property's a little hilly, and there are retaining walls in several places on the property. And a lot of those, due to tree growth and just neglect, have fallen down over time. And so in some of the critical areas, we actually started to rebuild those. And so kind of learned the lost art of dry stone wall building. There's no shortage of projects on the farm. And they're also, going around the property, there are some hidden gems, just beautiful detail work that had just been neglected over years. And so part of it was just, power washing and cleaning the buildings. And it really, after a good cleaning, the farm building just started really popping, and really started looking nice. A little bit better. So through all of our research, all of our farm research and classes we took, it was clear that a successful family farm needed to be a diversified operation, and so we decided a small family farm that isn't 1,000 acres and just monocropping. It had to be diversified. And so we focused on 3 enterprises. The first one was hops. The year we moved in, we put in a 1-acre hops yard. The microbrew industry in Western New York is really booming right now, and hops is one of the key ingredients to microbreweries, to beer in general. And so yeah, and the hops are actually a lot of fun to grow. They're a perennial plant, and they grow up a 18-foot high trellis system. So we put in a large trellis, and every year, actually in June, they grow up to a foot a day. Come fall, they set out these little things that look like pine cones, and these little cones, and that's what you pick and dry, and that's what you use for brewing beer. And so every fall we have a little harvest event and harvest those hops cones. Next was the orchards. So we still have some very nice heirloom apples. For example, the Northern Spies, you just can't find those anymore. But that's what everyone used to make pies and cider back in the day. It's an amazing baking apple. And we actually have hundreds of trees of those. And so we had an orchard consultant come in and tell us how to really manage these and bring them back into production. And so we have Northern Spies, Romes, and then there's the Bartlett and Bosc pears. And some of the pear trees are over 100 years old. So these are probably pears that were actually sent to the presidents back in the day. So it's pretty neat. And so that's coming along. And then next is the vegetable production. organic vegetable production, and Bree's going to talk to you a little bit more about that and the farm share model.
Yeah. So the third enterprise for our little small family farm is organic vegetables, and we grow over 75 crops and over 100 varieties of those crops. So we grow the favorites: tomatoes, peppers. Mini bell peppers is one of our popular ones. A lot of leafy greens, Swiss chard, a lot of lettuce mix, and pretty much everything from spring until fall. And we've really expanded that as well. And yeah, so that's us last year. Yeah, so we started out with a little farm stand, and then we went to the Lockport Community Market, and then some farm stand customers asked us if we had ever considered doing a community-supported agriculture farm share program, which I know some people are familiar with it, but are other people familiar with the farm share program? It's kind of neat. It's how it works is that people purchase a share at the beginning of the season, and then they come every week for 20 weeks and pick up their share of the harvest. So it's great because people get a lot of really freshly harvested vegetables, big variety, and I mean we harvest the day of or the day before, and then and it's great for the farm because it is a steady source of revenue for a small family farm, which is critical for survival. So yeah, we said, yeah, we have considered that. We were building up to it, but it was kind of just that little push that we needed to start. So last year we started with a really small group of 30 members, and it went really well. And so yeah, this is a summer harvest. We have, I don't know, 13 types of tomatoes and all sorts of zucchini and summer squash, and there are bell peppers back there, and it's actually kind of become a little co-op too. So people, we purchase from other farms and bring in stuff like sweet corn and stuff like that. So it's kind of neat. It's created this little community around the farm, which, if you think back, farms have always been a center of communities and a lifeline. And so it's neat to see the farm kind of come back to life like that again, in a very similar way. And we also, the farm share program has also, it's a way for people to come and enjoy the farm and have the historic farm experience, because it is a really special place. We think so. We like to share it with people too. So we put in an acre pick-your-own garden for members as well, and it's pretty much, it's all you can pick on flowers, green beans, cherry tomatoes, ground cherries, that's lemongrass actually, so we have some interesting things too, peas, you name it, we put it in there. So it's nice, we are able to do that, and we do grow organically, which is a harder to find option around Lockport. So we do grow organically. We don't use any synthetic chemicals in the pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, fertilizers, and we grow everything from seed, which Rich was mentioning earlier, that we were able to find some of the varieties of the crops that they grew in the 1880s. So we were able to offer those as well, which is pretty fun to grow the same stuff that they grew, 130 years ago. And then in addition to the farm share program, which we're growing that this year. So in that program, it's very fun, and I do have brochures in the back if you're interested in that, want to learn more about it. We hope that you'll consider it. And in addition to that, we've done a few public events on the property. One is for artists in the orchard, we call it, where it's on plain art, and people can come down and do photography, painting, whatever their art medium is. And we do that in the spring and in the fall. And it's a day, and it's really quite fun. That's Manning, actually, if anybody's from knows Manning. And then we also host a hop harvest party, which is really fun. We partner with a local brewery, and we come down and we actually harvest hops, which is also something that people did back in the 1880s and 90s when a lot more farms grew hops around New York State. It was definitely like a tradition to come out to the farm and have big parties and harvest hops. So we do that, and it helps us get the harvest done as well. And then we also do a charity yoga session with Laura Igo Yoga Studio, and all the proceeds go to Lockport Cares. So, yeah, and then we also we also have the 7th generation on the farm. This is Amelia Wren. She was born last year, and she's 14 months, as I mentioned earlier, and so we're just can't wait until she's old enough to help us weed carrots. So it'll be a few more years yet, but we're getting there. So yeah, that's it. We want to thank you very much that's our story. We want to thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to come and speak, and also to thank you for what you do as a society. It's really important. I mean, genealogy has actually changed our lives. It made us come here and start this venture, and so we appreciate your society giving people the space to really learn about their family. It's important, and we thank you for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions? Because I know we have some holes in our history that we'd like to learn more about and fill. Because basically everything is based off of the history that my grandmother pulled together in the old documents that we found in the house. And so I think there's a lot more to learn about the property.
You mentioned these drainage. Can you talk a little more about
Sure.
how they build them?
So the system is called a French drain, and this is the old French drain system. And so what we hit with a dozer by mistake, unfortunately, but we learned about it that way. So underneath the ground, about 3 feet down, they had put, it's a stone, basically they put a ditch, they lined the bottom with flat stones, the sides with flat stones, and then put a large 3 foot by 5 foot capstone on top of that, going probably 1,500 feet across the property. And they had multiple ones of these. And so these were all underground. As the water...
All hand dug.
All hand dug. It was just incredible. Most of the farm and most of what's known as Lower Town at that time, way back in the day, was swampland. It all drained into 18 Mile Creek. And so this is a way to capture the groundwater and bring it below ground so it wouldn't flood. And so it gave you some really prime soil to work in, because it used to be all muck land, and then they're able to drain that and plant in it. And so we actually tried to fix, we were putting in our own drainage system because the trees and roots and whatnot had blocked off part of the system. So when they were digging across to put in the new small drain tile, they hit this old existing system that we didn't know we had, and it just shot off like a geyser and then collapsed. And then 100 feet up the hill, water started shooting out of the ground. Then further up the hill, water started shooting out of the ground. And we had a lake down there. And so we had to, last year we had to ditch it, and this year we put in a 10-inch tile to catch that overflow, because we're talking to the soil and water people who hadn't seen that. They've heard of these. There's one other farm that they've heard of one exists, one of those 1800s, early 1800s farm, but they haven't actually seen one. But they looked at the topographic maps and realized that 75 acres was draining to one point, which was the tile that drained through that road. Yeah. And so it was a learning experience. But it's just amazing to know, that infrastructure was down there. And apparently there's another one that is on the other side of North Adams Street, because we also had another guy said 20 years ago he hit one with a backhoe, and it was a mess. But it's amazing that that infrastructure is still working in some parts. And I just can't imagine the amount of labor that went into doing that for 1,500 feet or more across the property, these huge stone slabs buried underground.
I don't know how you get all that done. Have you thought of tapping into the scouts? If there would be a scouter that would have want to do a project, that you could give them a project to help you out.
Yeah, and there might be. I was a Boy Scout. I was an Eagle Scout. So
Yay, good for you.
I'd definitely be open to that. There are some projects like some of the old retaining walls that are crumbling that could be a fun
Yeah.
Eagle Scout project.
Help them learn and they can help you.
Yeah, there's plenty of merit badges to be had there.
Okay.
For sure.
Back in the old days, did they have honeybees on a farm, and do you have them now?
We have them now. We have 2 hives, and we're actually going to try to split them off into probably 4 hives this year. Back in the day, I don't know. There's no evidence of them. There's evidence of large stables, lots of chickens, a lot of livestock, but nothing in the way of honeybees. And we found some books in the old library that was Silas McCollum's office about honeybee maintenance, but I don't know if they actually had them. But right now we have, because
The wild bees.
yeah, we have the wild bees. The
Yeah,
back portion of the property, if you go along Alcott Street behind Reed's, that's dedicated wetland. It's DEC wetland. You can't really touch it. And so what we have in there is a wild bee population, these solitary bees, and these are honeybees are kind of lazy, but these wild bees will go out in really cold temperatures any day. Like if it's raining, they don't care. They will go out and they pollinate everything. If you look at this photo, there are actually 3 different varieties of bees on this sunflower. And I've seen some flowers, we had some bigger sunflowers the previous year, and I counted 7 different types of bees on one flower at one time. And so we don't have any shortage of pollinators.
But we are conscious of that too, so we're glad that we can maintain their ecology a little bit too, so that we don't want to lose them.
Yeah, and that's
They're
also
great
why
pollinators.
one of the reasons why we do organic, so we don't do any pesticides, which is a little extra work. It means, and there are things like pheromone inhibitors that distract insects from orchards and stuff like that, so it's just a smell that distracts them and confuses them so they don't lay eggs on things. And there are also coverings that we can put over like broccoli and all the brassicas that keep some of the worms, you know, the codling moths and stuff out of it. And so we're able to manage a lot of the pests, and we're getting better at managing the pests organically and keeping the bee population alive. But the honeybees we have now, we pulled probably 50 pounds of honey out of it last year, and I just checked last week when it warmed up and they were doing their cleansing flight, and both hives made it through the winter, which is amazing because that was a rough winter.
Okay, well, we'd like to thank you again, and you're all welcome to stay and have some refreshments, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.